My name is Bradley Mitchell, and at 34, I sacrificed my entire 20s building our family construction business from $2 million to $30 million in annual revenue. Last month, at my father's retirement party, my sister Rachel, who barely showed interest in the company for years, somehow convinced everyone she was the mastermind behind our success. The shock of watching her take credit for my life's work left me speechless. Before I continue with this unbelievable story, let me know where you're watching from. And if you've ever been betrayed by family, hit that like button and subscribe to see how I turned this nightmare into the best decision of my life. Mitchell Construction wasn't always the $30 million enterprise it is today. My father, Harold Mitchell, started the company 35 years ago with nothing but a pickup truck, a toolbox, and an unmatched work ethic. I still remember him coming home every night smelling like sawdust and concrete, his hands calloused and his back aching, but never once complaining. He worked 80-hour weeks, taking any job he could find, from small residential repairs to whatever commercial work was available. Those early years were lean, but his reputation for honesty and quality grew steadily. Even as a kid, I was fascinated by the business. While other boys wanted to be astronauts or football players, I dreamed of building skyscrapers and running job sites. By 13, I was spending weekends at construction sites, learning from the ground up. Dad would put me to work sweeping floors, organizing tools, and eventually helping with basic tasks. I soaked up everything like a sponge, asking endless questions about materials, techniques, and costs. When I was 16, Dad let me shadow his estimator, showing me how to calculate materials and labor for bids. I had a natural aptitude for the numbers side of the business, spotting inefficiencies that even experienced employees missed. By senior year of high school, I was helping prepare actual bids under supervision, and some of them even won contracts. My sister Rachel, 2 years younger than me, couldn't have been more different. While I was talking construction at the dinner table, she was buried in fashion magazines. When I was working weekends at job sites, she was shopping with friends at the mall. There's nothing wrong with that. We all have different interests, but the contrast in our engagement with the family business was stark from the beginning. I attended State University, double majoring in construction management and business administration. Every summer and winter break, I worked full-time at Mitchell Construction, rotating through different departments to learn every aspect of the operation. By graduation, I had already implemented a digital document management system that saved us thousands in paper costs and countless hours of filing time. Rachel, meanwhile, attended an expensive art school in New York to study fashion design. She rarely came home, and when she did, she showed zero interest in the family business. Dad was proud of her pursuing her passion, constantly telling everyone about her fashion studies and internships with designers I'd never heard of. He paid for her apartment in Manhattan and gave her a generous monthly allowance, while I worked for an hourly wage at the company during school breaks. I joined Mitchell Construction full-time after college, eager to modernize operations and expand our services. The company had grown to about $2 million in annual revenue by then, with 20 employees and a solid reputation for mid-sized commercial projects. Dad was still running everything the same way he had for 20 years, paper contracts, handshake deals, and gut-feeling estimates. My first major contribution was implementing proper project management software that tracked every dollar and hour spent. Dad was resistant initially, insisting his method worked fine, but the results were undeniable. We reduced waste by 15% in the first year alone. Next, I developed a preventative maintenance program for our equipment, extending their lifespan and reducing emergency repair costs by 70%. The real game-changer came when I convinced Dad to expand into government contracting. I spent months researching the requirements, certifications, and bidding processes. I wrote our first government proposal myself, staying up 3 nights straight to perfect it. When we won that first contract worth $1.2 million, Even Dad had to admit my approach was working. Year after year, I poured everything into the business. While friends were traveling, buying homes, and starting families, I was working 12-hour days, often 6 or 7 days a week. I missed weddings, reunions, and vacations to handle emergencies at job sites or finalize important bids. My personal life suffered. My girlfriend Amanda eventually left because she felt the business always came first. She wasn't wrong. 5 years ago, we faced a crisis that nearly bankrupted the company. Our largest client went under, owing us $800,000 for completed work. Simultaneously, 3 major pieces of equipment failed within the same month, requiring expensive replacements. Cash flow dried up almost overnight, and we were at risk of missing payroll for 40 employees who depended on us. I mortgaged my condo to inject capital into the business. I renegotiated payment terms with every supplier. I personally met with each of our lenders to restructure debt. For 6 months, I took no salary, working longer hours than ever to stabilize the company. Through sheer determination and strategic pivoting to more profitable service lines, we not only survived but emerged stronger. By last year, Mitchell Construction had grown to $30 million in annual revenue with over 100 employees. We had diversified into specialized services like historical restoration and sustainable building, commanding premium prices for our expertise. I had built a management team of industry professionals who shared my vision for the company's future. Throughout this entire growth period, Rachel remained in New York, pursuing her fashion career with limited success. She designed for small boutique labels but never quite broke through to the major fashion houses she aspired to join. Dad continued supporting her financially, even as I repeatedly argued that we should reinvest that money in the business. Last spring, Dad announced he was ready to retire. He wanted to spend more time traveling with Mom and playing golf. He planned a grand retirement celebration for the end of the year, inviting industry leaders, longtime clients, and all our employees. I assumed this would also be when he officially handed leadership to me. After all, I had essentially been running the company for years already. Little did I know what was actually about to unfold. About 6 months before Dad's retirement party, Rachel suddenly moved back from New York. She said the fashion industry was too cutthroat, and that she wanted to reconnect with her roots. At 32, after a decade in New York with little to show for it, she arrived at our parents' doorstep with 8 suitcases and a story about wanting a fresh start. I was actually happy when she first expressed interest in joining the family business. Despite our different paths, she was my sister, and I thought having another family member involved might ease my workload. When she asked for a job, I created a marketing director position for her, thinking her fashion background might bring a fresh perspective to our brand image. Her first few weeks seemed promising. She redecorated the office reception area, which admittedly needed updating. She took photos of our completed projects for a portfolio and started a company social media account. I was pleased to see her taking initiative, even if these were relatively minor contributions to a $30 million operation. The first red flag appeared during a staff meeting about a month after she started. I had developed a new client relationship management strategy that had taken months to research and refine. As I prepared to present it, Rachel jumped in. "I think everyone will be excited about the new client management approach I've been developing," she announced confidently. I was confused but assumed she was referring to a marketing angle. As she continued, however, she outlined my entire strategy point by point as if it were her own creation. Several employees who had previously discussed the plan with me looked confused, but no one said anything. Not wanting to embarrass her, I stayed silent too, but spoke with her privately afterward. "Rachel, that strategy you presented was actually something I've been working on for months," I explained gently. "Oh, was it?" she replied with a dismissive laugh. "I must have heard you mention some of those ideas and expanded on them. Great minds think alike, I guess." I let it go, chalking it up to a misunderstanding. But similar incidents began occurring with alarming frequency. She would sit in on my meetings with clients or contractors, saying little during the actual discussions. Then later reference her meetings when talking to Dad. Speaking of Dad, Rachel suddenly became his shadow. She started having lunch with him daily, something I rarely had time for given my workload. She would arrive early to make him coffee and stay late to recap the day with him. Meanwhile, her actual marketing duties received minimal attention. 3 months before the retirement party, our IT manager informed me that Rachel had requested access to confidential company files, including financial statements, client contracts, and my personal project notes. When I asked her about this, she claimed she needed to understand the big picture to do her marketing job effectively. Against my better judgment, Dad overrode my concerns and granted her the access. Several employees began coming to me with concerns. Jared Wilson, my most loyal project manager who had been with us for 15 years, pulled me aside after Rachel took credit for his crew's innovative solution to a difficult foundation problem. "Bradley, I don't want to cause family drama," Jared said uncomfortably, "but your sister is telling everyone she directed us on how to solve the Westfield project issue. She wasn't even on site that day." Similar reports came from other departments. Rachel was apparently spending more time cultivating her image as a company leader than doing actual work. When I confronted her again, she accused me of being territorial and paranoid. "You've always been jealous of my relationship with Dad," she said. "Now you can't handle that I'm good at this business too. Maybe you're afraid of a little healthy competition." The situation escalated when I discovered altered slides in my presentation before a meeting with potential investors. My detailed growth projections had been replaced with simplified versions that prominently featured Rachel's name as the strategy architect. I only caught it because I always reviewed materials minutes before presenting. When confronted, Rachel claimed the marketing team had updated the slides to make them more accessible, and must have made a mistake with the attribution. Perhaps most concerning was how Rachel began subtly changing the narrative about the company's history during casual conversations. She would tell new employees stories about helping Dad start the business. She was a child when it started, or how she had always been involved behind the scenes. Completely untrue. She spoke about my contributions as if they were collective family decisions or, worse, her ideas that I had merely implemented. I was deeply conflicted about bringing these issues to Dad. He seemed so happy having both his children at the company, and his health hadn't been great the previous year. The last thing I wanted was to stress him before his retirement. I convinced myself we could sort things out after the leadership transition, which I still believed would go to me based on my track record. As the retirement party approached, I noticed Rachel spending more and more time closed in Dad's office with the door locked. When I'd walk in, they would abruptly change the subject or say they were just reminiscing. I tried to dismiss my growing unease as pre-event stress. The final warning came just 3 days before the party. Samantha Perry, a friend of Rachel's from college who had visited the office, pulled me aside as she was leaving. "Bradley, I feel weird saying this," she whispered, "but you should know Rachel has been telling people she's taking over the company." She showed me a draft of a press release announcing her as the new CEO. "I thought you should know." I thanked her but still couldn't believe Dad would make such a decision without discussing it with me first. Despite all the warning signs, I convinced myself there must be a misunderstanding. After all, I had given everything to Mitchell Construction for more than a decade. Surely that counted for something. The night before the party, I stayed late at the office finalizing my speech congratulating Dad on his retirement. I planned to honor his legacy while subtly highlighting my readiness to lead the company forward. Looking back, my naivety is almost embarrassing. The retirement party was held at the Grand Hotel downtown, the same venue where we had celebrated the company's 25th anniversary 5 years earlier. No expense had been spared: elaborate floral arrangements, top-shelf open bar, gourmet catering, and even a custom-ized sculpture of the company logo. Nearly 300 people attended, including industry leaders, competitors who had become friends, loyal clients, and every single company employee and their families. I arrived early to check final arrangements and greet guests. Rachel showed up an hour later in a designer dress, immediately taking over as if she had organized the entire event. Though I had handled every detail and personally paid for several upgrades out of my own pocket. The evening began with cocktails and mingling. I noticed Rachel spending significant time with Richard Kensington, a potential investor I had been courting for months. They seemed unusually familiar with each other, laughing and speaking closely. When I approached to join the conversation, Rachel smoothly excused them both, saying she needed to show Richard something important. At dinner, I was surprised to find myself seated at a table with distant acquaintances rather than at the family table near the podium. Rachel sat beside Dad at the center table, reviewing notes and whispering in his ear occasionally. A printed program had been placed at each setting, which was odd since we hadn't planned one. Opening it, I was shocked to see Rachel listed as Executive Vice President and Successor, a title that had never existed and certainly had never been discussed with me. After dinner, Dad took the stage to give his retirement speech. He looked distinguished in his custom suit, emotional as he surveyed the room full of people who had been part of his professional journey. He began by recounting the humble beginnings of Mitchell Construction, stories I had heard throughout my childhood and had lived part of myself. When I started this company, I never imagined it would grow to what it is today, he said, his voice thick with emotion. For many years, it was a struggle just to make payroll and keep the lights on. But we persevered. I nodded along, feeling proud of what we had built together. Then, the speech took an unexpected turn. About 8 years ago, we faced challenges that nearly destroyed everything we had built. Dad continued. The company was stagnating. We were using outdated methods and missing opportunities for growth. I frowned, confused by this characterization. 8 years ago was precisely when I had joined full-time and begun modernizing operations. But then, Dad said, his face brightening, my daughter Rachel stepped in. While pursuing her own career, she never forgot about the family business. Behind the scenes, she provided the strategies and vision that would transform Mitchell Construction. A cold weight settled in my stomach as Dad continued praising Rachel's supposed contributions. According to him, she had been the architect of our expansion into government contracting, had developed our sustainability initiatives, and had saved the company during the financial crisis 5 years ago. I looked around in disbelief, expecting to see confusion on the faces of longtime employees who knew the truth. Instead, I saw polite smiles and nodding heads. Had everyone gone insane? Or had Rachel's campaign of revisionist history been more extensive than I realized? When Rachel officially joined the company 6 months ago, Dad continued, she brought her incredible talent and vision into the office every day. The growth we've seen just since her arrival has been remarkable. In reality, we had lost 2 minor contracts since Rachel joined, and a major marketing initiative she had been responsible for had failed completely. And so, Dad said, building to his conclusion, it gives me enormous pleasure to announce that upon my retirement, Rachel will be taking over as Chief Executive Officer of Mitchell Construction. The room erupted in applause. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. This had to be a nightmare. Any moment I would wake up, sweating but relieved it wasn't real. Rachel took the stage, embracing our father with tears in her eyes that I could only interpret as crocodile tears given what was unfolding. She began her own prepared speech, a masterclass in fiction that painted her as the company's savior. While I was in New York, I was always working on strategies for our family business, she claimed. Those late-night calls with Dad, the weekend visits, the financial models I created, all of it was building toward this moment. There had been no late-night calls. Her visits home had been rare and brief. She had never created a financial model in her life. When the company was nearly bankrupt 5 years ago, she continued shamelessly, I flew home every weekend for 6 months to restructure our debt and renegotiate with suppliers. I had to grip the table to steady myself. I was the one who had restructured the debt, meeting personally with every creditor. Rachel had visited exactly once during that crisis, for our mother's birthday. The sustainable building division that now generates 40% of our revenue? That was my concept, developed after extensive research into industry trends. That division had been my initiative, created after I obtained specialized certifications and secured our first 3 green building projects through relationships I had cultivated. As Rachel continued appropriating my life's work, I scanned the room again. Most people were captivated by her performance. A few long-time employees looked uncomfortable, their eyes occasionally darting to me with what appeared to be pity. Jared Wilson, my loyal project manager, stared at his plate, refusing to witness the travesty. When Rachel finished her speech to enthusiastic applause, I pushed my chair back and made my way to my father. I needed to understand what was happening. Before I could reach him, I was intercepted by clients and industry peers congratulating me on my sister's achievement, and asking what I would do now that she was taking over. I mumbled vague responses while continuing to make my way toward Dad. When I finally reached him, he was surrounded by admirers. I touched his elbow gently. Dad, can we talk privately for a moment? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. He glanced at me dismissively. Not now, Bradley. We're celebrating. We can talk business tomorrow. But Dad. Everything Rachel said. I said not now. He interrupted firmly, turning back to his conversation. Stunned by his dismissal, I retreated to the bar, ordering a double scotch. As I contemplated my next move, I overheard Rachel speaking to Richard Kensington and another investor just a few feet away. Bradley will be stepping back from operations, she was saying confidently. He's been feeling burned out lately. We think it's best if he takes some time off to reassess his role. Between us, there have been some concerning decisions lately that I've had to quietly correct. I nearly choked on my drink. She was not only taking credit for my work but actively undermining my reputation and positioning me for removal. As the evening progressed, the magnitude of the betrayal became clearer. This hadn't been a spontaneous announcement or misunderstanding. This was a calculated coup that had likely been in planning since Rachel's return. The carefully crafted speeches, the printed programs, the strategic conversations with key business contacts, all of it pointed to premeditation. I couldn't bear to stay any longer. Without saying goodbye, I slipped out and walked to the parking garage. Sitting in my car, I couldn't even cry. The shock was too complete, the betrayal too profound. Everything I had built, every sacrifice I had made, had been rewritten to make Rachel the hero of a story she had barely participated in. I drove home in a daze, unable to process what had just happened or what I should do next. All I knew was that my life's work had been stolen from me in the most public and humiliating way possible, by my own sister, with my father's full support. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? My entire professional identity had been erased in a 3-hour event. I paced my condo, alternating between rage, disbelief, and crushing disappointment. Around 2 a.m., I decided that instead of wallowing, I needed to understand exactly what had happened and how deep the betrayal went. I opened my laptop and logged into the company's server remotely. As acting COO, I still had access to all digital files and emails. I started digging through communications between Rachel and my father, searching for evidence of their plan. What I found was worse than I had imagined. 6 months ago, right around when Rachel returned from New York, she had started emailing Dad about concerns regarding my leadership. The emails were masterfully manipulative, beginning with subtle questions about company direction and gradually escalating to outright fabrications about mistakes I had supposedly made. I'm worried about Bradley, she wrote in one email. He seems stretched too thin, making decisions without proper consideration. The Harriman project budget overrun could have been avoided with better oversight. The Harriman project had come in under budget. We had celebrated this achievement as a team just weeks before she sent that email. In another message, she wrote, "Several employees have confided in me about Bradley's erratic behavior. They're afraid to bring concerns directly to him. I think we need to consider a leadership structure that provides more stability." No employees had expressed such concerns. My management style had always been open and collaborative, with regular feedback sessions that were documented in our HR files. The most damning email was from just 2 weeks before the retirement party. "Dad, I've finalized the press release announcing my transition to CEO. I've also prepared talking points for your retirement speech that will help position this change as a natural evolution rather than a sudden shift. Bradley might be upset initially, but he'll come to see this is best for everyone." The depth of their deception was staggering. I downloaded and saved copies of all these communications to a secure personal drive, my hands shaking with anger and betrayal. Next, I found several presentations and reports I had created that had been saved under new file names with Rachel listed as the author. In some cases, she had made minor cosmetic changes, a different font or color scheme, but the content was indisputably mine. These altered documents had then been shared with Dad and the board members, gradually creating a false narrative of Rachel's business acumen. At 4:30 a.m., my phone rang. It was Marcus Thompson, my best friend since college, who had attended the retirement party as my guest. "Bradley, I couldn't sleep," he said, his voice tense. "What happened tonight was insane. I kept waiting for you to stand up and say something. I was too shocked," I admitted. "I couldn't even process what was happening." Marcus sighed heavily. "There's something else you should know. After you left, Rachel was talking to people about you. She implied you've been struggling with mental health issues, saying the pressure of the business had become too much for you to handle mentally. She made it sound like this leadership change was partly for your own good." My blood ran cold. She wasn't just stealing my accomplishments. She was actively undermining my character and stability to prevent any potential challenge to her new position. "That's a complete lie," I said, my voice tight with anger. "I know that," Marcus assured me. "Anyone who knows you knows that." But she was very convincing, all concerned looks and hushed tones. People ate it up. After talking with Marcus, I tried to get a few hours of sleep but failed. At 7 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it was Jared Wilson, my project manager. "Boss, I don't know what to say about last night," he began awkwardly. It wasn't right." "Thank you for saying that, Jared," I replied, grateful for the validation. "The office is buzzing already," he continued. "Rachel sent an email at 6 a.m. announcing her new role and scheduling individual meetings with all department heads today. There's a rumor you're taking a medical leave of absence effective immediately." This was moving even faster than I had anticipated. "Is that the official line?" I asked. "That's what HR is telling people who call in. Your access card has already been deactivated, according to security. They're saying it's a system update, but no one else's cards were affected." After thanking Jared for the information, I checked my company email. Sure enough, I had been removed from most distribution lists, and several folders I regularly accessed showed permission errors. They were systematically cutting me out, likely hoping I would simply accept the situation and disappear quietly. I discovered Rachel had scheduled meetings with all our major clients over the next week. The calendar invitations included notes about transitioning client relationships and introducing the new leadership structure. She was moving quickly to cement her position before I could react. The final piece of the puzzle came when I received a text from Lawrence Sanders, our company's legal advisor and a personal friend. It read simply, "Transfer paperwork being prepared for your father's ownership shares to Rachel. Not to you as previously discussed. Call me ASAP. For years, Dad had talked about dividing his 60% ownership stake between Rachel and me upon his retirement, with me receiving the majority as the active company leader. Now, it appeared Rachel was positioned to receive everything, leaving me with just my existing 10% stake, enough to receive dividends but insufficient to influence company decisions. By mid-morning, the full picture had become crystal clear. This wasn't just about a title or public recognition. Rachel and my father had systematically planned to erase my contributions, question my stability, and remove me from the company I had helped build. They were rewriting history and securing the legal and financial framework to ensure I had no recourse. As devastating as these discoveries were, they also ignited something in me. The shock began to fade, replaced by cold, calculated determination. If they wanted to play this game, they were about to discover they weren't the only strategic thinkers in the family. I had built Mitchell Construction into what it was today through intelligence, persistence, and an unparalleled understanding of the business. Those same qualities would now serve a different purpose, taking back what was rightfully mine. I've always believed that the best business decisions come from careful analysis rather than emotional reactions. Despite the personal betrayal I felt, I forced myself to approach this situation methodically. I would need leverage, evidence, allies, and perfect timing. First, I needed to document my contributions to the company in a way that couldn't be disputed. I spent the day gathering evidence, project plans with my digital signatures, emails confirming my strategic decisions, financial records showing growth tied directly to my initiatives, and testimonials from clients who had worked specifically with me. I created a comprehensive portfolio that irrefutably established my role in the company's growth. This wasn't just for potential legal action, it was also to remind myself of what I had accomplished, a counterbalance to the gaslighting I had experienced at the retirement party. Next, I needed to secure my digital footprint. I suspected Rachel would soon try to lock me out of all company systems if she hadn't already. I systematically downloaded copies of all intellectual property I had personally developed, the project management system I had coded, the proprietary estimating algorithms I had created, and the client management database I had built from scratch. These were tools I had developed nights and weekends, often on my personal equipment, with minimal company resources. By mid-afternoon, I arranged a discreet meeting with Jared Wilson and 4 other key employees who had expressed concerns about the leadership change. We met at a coffee shop 3 miles from the office to avoid suspicion. I'm not going to ask anyone to take sides, I told them honestly. But I need to know where things stand and what's being said when I'm not there. They shared that Rachel had already begun holding departmental meetings, making grandiose promises about company expansion while demonstrating alarming ignorance about basic operational details. In a meeting with the estimating team, she couldn't explain our pricing structure for government contracts. With the project managers, she confused 2 major ongoing projects, suggesting changes that would violate building codes. She has no idea what she's doing, Jared said bluntly. She keeps saying she'll circle back on technical questions or deflects to generalities about innovative approaches. This information was valuable. Rachel's fashion background hadn't prepared her for the complex technical and regulatory aspects of construction management. This knowledge gap could be leveraged at the right moment. I also learned that several employees were already updating their resumes, concerned about the company's direction under Rachel's leadership. This potential exodus of talent would severely impact operations if it occurred simultaneously. After meeting with the employees, I contacted 4 of our largest clients directly. I positioned these calls as courtesy check-ins rather than explicit discussions about the leadership change. Just wanted to touch base about the Westridge project timeline. I would begin, then naturally let the conversation flow to recent events. Each client expressed surprise about the leadership announcement, having worked primarily with me for years. 2 specifically asked if I would still be overseeing their projects. as they had concerns about continuity. I assured them I was still involved while carefully avoiding any disparaging comments about Rachel or my father. These relationships would be crucial in the coming days. That evening, I met with an independent attorney who specialized in family business disputes. I laid out the situation, sharing the evidence I had gathered. "Based on what you've shown me, you have several potential legal avenues," he advised. "But litigation between family members is costly, both financially and emotionally. It also tends to damage the business itself, which diminishes the value for everyone involved." He suggested a different approach. "Your strongest leverage may be your operational knowledge and client relationships. From what you've described, your sister lacks the technical expertise to effectively run this business without you." This aligned with my thinking. A legal battle might eventually yield some justice, but it would be lengthy and destructive. A strategic business move could be executed more quickly and with better results. My next step was to secure financial resources. I contacted my bank to establish a new business line of credit based on my personal assets. I would need operating capital if I decided to launch a competing venture. I also reached out to Richard Kensington, the investor Rachel had been courting at the party, requesting a discreet meeting. When we met for lunch the following day, Richard was surprisingly forthcoming. "I'm going to be blunt, Bradley," he said after we ordered. "Your sister pitched me on investing in Mitchell Construction, but something felt off. She couldn't answer basic questions about cash flow projections or capital expenditure plans. When I asked about the Johnston Street development specifically, she changed the subject. The Johnston Street project was our largest current undertaking, a $12 million mixed-use development I had personally secured after 2 years of relationship building. I did some digging after the party," Richard continued. "Everyone in the industry knows you've been the operational force behind Mitchell Construction's growth. This sudden leadership change doesn't pass the smell test." By the end of our lunch, Richard had not only declined to invest in Mitchell Construction under Rachel's leadership, but had expressed interest in backing any new venture I might consider launching. That evening, I received an unexpected call from my mother. We had always been close, but she typically stayed out of business matters, supporting both her children equally. "Bradley," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I need to tell you something about your father and sister." According to my mother, Dad had always favored Rachel, even from childhood. He saw himself in her charismatic personality and social ease, whereas my more analytical, detail-oriented nature reminded him of his own father, with whom he'd had a strained relationship. "When Rachel's fashion career stalled, your father was devastated for her," Mom explained. "He couldn't bear to see her fail while you succeeded so visibly. This plan to install her as CEO. It started as a way to give her a fresh start, but it grew into something ugly." "Did you know what they were planning?" I asked, trying to keep accusation from my tone. "Not the extent of it," she said softly. "I knew your father wanted to give Rachel a significant role, but I never imagined they would diminish your contributions or try to push you out. I confronted your father after the party, but he's convinced himself this is the right thing for everyone." This conversation provided the missing emotional context for what had happened. My father's actions weren't just about business. They were driven by a lifetime of complicated family dynamics and personal biases I hadn't fully recognized. Armed with this knowledge, I spent the next 2 days finalizing my strategy. I identified the specific services and client relationships that I could legally transition to a new entity. I drafted operating procedures and organizational structures. I calculated exactly how much capital would be needed for the first 6 months of operations. Most importantly, I identified Mitchell Construction's greatest vulnerability, the company's complete dependence on proprietary systems I had developed and client relationships I had nurtured. Without me, these advantages would quickly erode. By the 5th day after the retirement party, my plan was complete. I had secured financing, prepared legal documentation for a new business entity, and confidentially discussed opportunities with key employees and clients. All that remained was to determine the perfect moment to execute. That moment arrived sooner than expected. On Friday morning, just 1 week after the retirement party, I received an email from Rachel. The subject line read simply, "Your separation package." The email outlined terms for my voluntary departure from Mitchell Construction, offering an insulting severance payment in exchange for signing a non-compete agreement and publicly supporting the leadership transition. The document was filled with thinly veiled references to my supposed mental health issues and performance concerns, a paper trail being created to justify my removal. Rachel had made a critical error. In her eagerness to formalize my exit, she had shown her hand too early. Before properly securing the operational knowledge and relationships the company needed to function without me. It was time to execute my plan. Monday morning, I arrived at the Mitchell Construction office at 6:30 a.m., using my backup access card to enter the building. As expected, most of my digital permissions had been revoked. But I had anticipated this and taken precautions. I went straight to the server room, where I implemented the first phase of my plan. The proprietary project management system that ran our operations was technically my intellectual property. I had developed it independently and had only licensed it to Mitchell Construction, a legal detail documented in employment agreements that Rachel had clearly never reviewed. I didn't disable the system. I simply revoked the company's license and transferred full control to my new business entity, Mitchell Innovation Group. By 7:15 a.m., I had called the 7 employees who had agreed to join my new venture. Each arrived at the office to collect their personal belongings and submit immediate resignations. These weren't just any employees. They were department heads and specialists whose knowledge was critical to ongoing projects. At 8 a.m., I began calling our top clients. These were carefully scripted conversations that I had rehearsed extensively. "Good morning, John. This is Bradley Mitchell. I wanted to personally inform you that I've left Mitchell Construction to start my own firm, Mitchell Innovation Group. I'll be continuing to provide the same services with the same team you've worked with directly." The responses were predictably supportive. These clients had relationships with me, not with the company logo or my sister. By 9:30 a.m., I had secured verbal commitments from clients representing 60% of the company's active projects. At 10 a.m., Rachel arrived at the office, fashionably late as had become her custom. I was waiting in her new CO office, my former office, reviewing documents calmly. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, clearly shocked to see me. "Your access should have been revoked." "I'm here to discuss transition," I replied evenly. "But not the transition you had in mind." I handed her a folder containing formal notices of intellectual property license revocation, client transfer requests, and employee resignations. "What is this?" she asked, flipping through the pages with growing alarm. "This is the reality of what happens when you steal credit for someone else's work," I explained. "You get the title, but not the expertise, relationships, or tools needed to actually do the job." Rachel's face flushed with anger. "You can't do this. Dad will sue you. We'll destroy you." "You're welcome to try," I said calmly. "But before you call the lawyers, you might want to check your email. I've sent over some interesting communications between you and Dad planning this coup, along with evidence of how you've misrepresented your contributions to the company. I'm sure the board and our industry contacts would find it fascinating reading." The color drained from her face. "This is blackmail," she whispered. "No, it's business," I corrected her. "Something you know very little about, as you're about to discover." As if on cue, Rachel's phone began ringing. It was the project manager for our largest client, calling to confirm they were transferring their contract to Mitchell Innovation Group. She stared at the caller ID in horror. "You have 2 choices," I continued as her phone kept ringing. "You can fight me, which will be expensive, public and ultimately futile. Or you can negotiate a reasonable settlement that allows both entities to move forward. Before she could respond, my father burst into the office, his face contorted with rage. "What the hell have you done?" he shouted. "The Westridge developers just called me saying they're terminating their contract." "I've done exactly what you taught me, Dad," I replied calmly. "I protected my interests and stood up for myself. Isn't that what you always said business was about?" Dad turned to Rachel. "Fix this. Call them back and fix this now." "She can't fix it," I interjected. "Rachel doesn't know the first thing about the Westridge development. She couldn't tell you the square footage, the zoning requirements, or the environmental mitigation measures we implemented. That's why they're coming with me, because they know I actually did the work." My father slumped into a chair, the reality of the situation beginning to dawn on him. "You'll destroy this company," he said, his voice suddenly weaker. "Everything I built." "No, Dad. Everything we built. I gave 10 years of my life to Mitchell Construction. I quadrupled its revenue, modernized its operations, and secured its reputation. And you gave it all to Rachel because, why? Because she's your favorite? Because her fashion career failed? Because you couldn't stand to see me succeed on my own merits?" The office had grown quiet, with employees gathering discreetly outside the door to listen to the confrontation. "This isn't personal," I continued, though of course it was deeply personal. "This is business. You made a business decision to remove me, and I've made a business decision to take my skills, relationships, and intellectual property elsewhere." An emergency board meeting was called for that afternoon. I presented a detailed explanation of my contributions to the company, the intellectual property I owned, and the client relationships I had developed. I showed how Rachel's takeover had been planned for months, with deliberate efforts to undermine my position and rewrite company history. Board members who had known me for years looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. When I finished my presentation, I excused myself, leaving them to deliberate with Rachel and my father. 3 hours later, I received a call from the board chairman. Rachel had been unable to answer basic operational questions or provide a viable plan for replacing the departed employees and clients. The stark reality had set in. Mitchell Construction couldn't function without me, but I could function perfectly well without Mitchell Construction. The following day brought a series of increasingly desperate calls from my father. The first few were angry and threatening, but by evening, his tone had changed to pleading. Major projects were already experiencing delays. Suppliers were calling with concerns about payment schedules. The company's stock was in free fall as word spread through the industry. "Come back," he finally said. "We can work something out. Co-COS, maybe? Whatever you want." "It's too late for that, Dad," I replied. "I've already incorporated Mitchell Innovation Group and signed contracts with clients. My employees started work this morning at our new office." In truth, our new office was currently a co-working space, but we had secured a permanent location starting the following month. My team was energized by the fresh start and the opportunity to build something without the baggage of family drama. By the end of the week, Mitchell Construction had lost 70% of its active projects and nearly 40% of its workforce. Rachel had made several public blunders in attempting to reassure remaining clients, demonstrating her lack of technical knowledge. The company's value had plummeted, and emergency meetings were being held to determine its future. Meanwhile, Mitchell Innovation Group was thriving. We had secured additional projects beyond those transferred from Mitchell Construction, as word spread about our launch. Richard Kensington had followed through on his investment offer, providing capital for rapid expansion. Our streamlined operation, free from outdated processes my father had insisted on maintaining, was already more profitable per project than Mitchell Construction had been. The final confrontation came 10 days after my departure. My parents requested a family dinner at their home. with Rachel and her husband Thomas also attending. I agreed, bringing along my attorney as a precaution. The atmosphere was tense as we sat around the dining table where we had shared countless family meals. My mother, clearly stressed by the situation, had prepared all my favorite dishes in what seemed like a peace offering. After an uncomfortable silence, my father cleared his throat. "We need to find a way forward as a family and as a business," he began. Rachel, subdued compared to her usual confident demeanor, nodded. "The company is struggling," she admitted. "We've lost key projects and can't replace the employees who left." "I never meant for things to go this far," my father continued. "I just wanted to secure Rachel's future. I thought you would be fine, Bradley. You've always landed on your feet." "So you sacrificed my career to rescue hers?" I asked plainly. "I didn't see it that way," he replied, though his eyes told a different story. "Rachel surprised me by speaking up. I was jealous," she said quietly. "You built something real while I chased a fashion dream that never materialized. When Dad suggested I could take over the company, it seemed like a shortcut to the success you had earned. I convinced myself I deserved it somehow." This admission, while insufficient given the damage done, was at least honest. For the first time since the retirement party, I felt something other than anger toward my sister. "We want to propose a settlement," my father said. "A formal division of assets and operations. Mitchell Construction will focus on residential and small commercial projects, returning to our roots, essentially. Mitchell Innovation Group will retain the larger commercial and government contracts. We'll each operate independently but agree not to directly compete for the same projects." My attorney and I had anticipated this approach. The terms my father outlined were similar to what we had prepared to suggest, with a few important differences. "I'm willing to consider that arrangement," I replied, "with some additional conditions. First, a public statement acknowledging my role in building Mitchell Construction and clarifying the circumstances of my departure. Second, a fair redistribution of Dad's ownership shares between Rachel and me. And third, a formal licensing agreement for any proprietary systems Mitchell Construction wishes to continue using." After some negotiation, we reached an agreement that satisfied all parties. Mitchell Construction would continue under Rachel's leadership but with a narrower focus and more appropriate expectations. Mitchell Innovation Group would operate as a completely separate entity, with no obligation to share resources or support the original company. As we prepared to leave, my father pulled me aside. For the first time in my adult life, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "I made a terrible mistake," he said quietly. "I let my own biases and Rachel's influence cloud my judgment. The company I built might not survive because of it." "Mitchell Construction can still succeed, Dad," I replied, "just on a scale better suited to Rachel's capabilities. Not every business needs to be a $30 million enterprise." He nodded slowly. "You've built something impressive in just days. I underestimated you your entire life, and I'm sorry for that. It wasn't a complete healing of our relationship, but it was an honest start." That confrontation happened 6 months ago. Since then, both companies have found their footing in different segments of the market. Mitchell Innovation Group has already reached $18 million in annualized revenue with a team of 65 employees, many of whom followed me from Mitchell Construction. We specialize in large commercial projects, government contracts, and sustainable building initiatives, the very areas I had developed at my father's company, Mitchell Construction. Now under Rachel's leadership with substantial guidance from my father, who postponed his retirement indefinitely, has scaled back to focus on residential and small commercial work. They operate at about $8 million annually, much smaller than their peak but still respectable for a regional construction firm. Rachel has actually found her niche in this scaled-down role, applying her design background to residential projects in ways that have attracted a loyal clientele. The settlement we negotiated included a public statement acknowledging my contributions to Mitchell Construction's growth and clarifying that my departure was to pursue an exciting new venture, rather than due to any performance or health concerns. This helped restore my professional reputation and corrected the narrative Rachel had tried to establish. The redistribution of ownership was more complex. My father's 60% stake was eventually split, with 35% going to me and 25% to Rachel. I then traded my entire stake in Mitchell Construction for Rachel's 10% of Mitchell Innovation Group, giving each of us complete control over our respective companies without the complication of family co-ownership. In the months since establishing Mitchell Innovation Group, I've had time to reflect on the lessons from this experience. First, I learned about the danger of silence. For years, I quietly allowed Rachel and my father to minimize my contributions, thinking my work would speak for itself. I should have documented my achievements more visibly and established clearer boundaries around credit for my ideas. Humility is admirable, but in business, you must advocate for yourself because others may not. Second, I recognized how family dynamics often transcend business logic. My father's decision to favor Rachel wasn't based on performance metrics or business acumen. It was driven by emotional patterns established decades ago. Understanding these underlying currents might have helped me navigate the situation more effectively from the beginning. Third, I discovered my own resilience. The betrayal at the retirement party could have destroyed me professionally and personally. Instead, it became the catalyst for building something better. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives force us to make changes we should have made long ago. Perhaps most importantly, I learned about forgiveness, not for others' benefit, but for my own peace of mind. I haven't forgotten what Rachel and my father did, but I've chosen not to let bitterness consume me. We maintain a professional relationship and are slowly rebuilding personal connections, though I doubt things will ever return to the way they were before. My relationship with my mother has actually strengthened through this ordeal. She visits my office regularly and has become something of a surrogate grandmother to my younger employees. She recently confided that she's proud of how I handled the situation, standing up for myself while still finding a solution that allowed both companies to survive. The professional community has largely sided with me as the truth about what happened became known. Several industry awards have come my way, acknowledging innovations I implemented both at Mitchell Construction and at my new company. Richard Kensington not only invested in Mitchell Innovation Group but has introduced me to his extensive network of developers and investors. Most surprisingly, Rachel and I had coffee last month, our first one-on-one meeting since the split. She seemed genuinely changed by the experience, humbled by the challenges of actually running a business rather than just claiming credit for others' work. "I never appreciated what you did all those years," she admitted. "Now that I'm doing even a fraction of it, I understand the pressure you were under. We're not close, and may never be again, but there's a new honesty between us that wasn't there before." As for my father, our relationship remains complicated. He calls occasionally to discuss industry matters or ask for advice on technical issues beyond Rachel's expertise. There's an unspoken acknowledgement in these conversations, a recognition that he made a massive error in judgment that cost him his relationship with his son and nearly destroyed his company. Looking ahead, Mitchell Innovation Group is positioned for continued growth. We're exploring expansion into neighboring states and have hired 3 engineers to further develop our proprietary systems. The company culture is collaborative and meritocratic, a deliberate contrast to the family-first environment that ultimately undermined Mitchell Construction. The betrayal I experienced was painful, but it forced me to create something that truly belongs to me, built on my terms and reflecting my values. In a strange way, I'm grateful for what happened. Had the succession gone as originally planned, I might have spent decades trying to please my father while working within the constraints of his vision. Now, I'm free to build something greater than I could have within those limitations. If you're watching this and facing your own betrayal, especially from family, Remember that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best opportunities. Value yourself enough to walk away from situations where your contributions aren't recognized. Document your achievements and stand up for your accomplishments. And know that starting over, while terrifying, can be the beginning of something far better than what you left behind. Have you ever had to start over after betrayal? Has family ever taken credit for your hard work? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming life's challenges and finding success on your own terms. Thank you for listening. And remember, sometimes losing everything is just the universe making room for something better.